welcome to episode 15 of Sanj Surati Talks. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you so much, people that are sharing this podcast on your social platforms. And also, thank you so much for your comments as well. People are saying some really cool things. I've got a really, really awesome guest for you guys. He's someone that I met about 10 years ago. I've been a fan of his work for a long time. And just randomly, I was thinking about him and I reached out to him and he's decided to come on the show. Please put your hands together for Mr. R. Paul Wilson.
Hey, Sanj.
How you doing?
I'm good. Trying to keep myself busy like everybody, I guess.
With the current COVID situation. Just before I dive into this podcast of you, are you called Paul? Are you called R. Paul? Are you called Mr. Wilson? What do you want me to call you?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
I have been called and am called pretty much all of those. Some people call me R. Paul, some people call me Paul, some people call me P. I have so many. I can almost dissect the groups of friends and the areas of interest that we share based on the names that I've picked up, and the older generation of fellow magicians in the US. They all called me Ron because they had assumed that I had changed my name because there was already a Ron Wilson, a very famous magician called Ron Wilson.
Right.
And Ron used to call me Ron, thinking I think he died thinking I'd changed my name on his behalf. But I've always been Paul, and the fact that my first name is Ronald was probably a good decision to go with Paul. But I use it as much as I can for writing, so people then can use it as a buffet of whatever they want to call me.
Okay. What do your parents call you?
Not very nice names. Pretty much. I've been Paul since I was a kid. My family all call me Paul, but
awesome.
The R. Paul was really, there was already a Paul Wilson who was writing, and he wrote books on calm.
Okay.
I'm clearly not that person, and there's an F. Paul Wilson who writes really great horror books that I love, so the R. Paul was kind of inspired by F. Paul Wilson.
Right.
I just thought, I'll do the same. And I've done that. And that's it's the only reason it's there. It's not some attempt to make myself sound more exotic. And if it was, it would have failed horribly.
So there's going to be people that are listening to this podcast, a very small amount of people who don't know who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm currently a filmmaker by profession and a consultant and producer for film and television. I've worked in film and TV for 20 years now, Whoa. I guess. And originally I was lots of things. I was in the army for a while. I was a computer programmer for a very long time until the year 2000. And then I kind of wanted to be a filmmaker when I was a kid, but the avenues were not really open to me at where I lived and at that age. So when I got to a certain point and, year 2000 was over and I just felt I couldn't do that anymore. It wasn't really anything that I wanted to do with my life. I basically went off and used my interest in magic, which I've had since I was a very young kid. About 8 years old, I discovered magic, and then used that because I'm quite creative and I create material that a lot of professional magicians use. I would never describe myself as a professional magician, but I've created a lot of material for those guys. I felt that was something I could use as a way into the film and TV business. And that's pretty much how it worked out, is that I used my knowledge and kind of got my foot in the door. And that brought me to where we are here. And there was a couple of TV shows along the way where I very foolishly stepped in front of the camera. and those were very successful, and that was very good, and that helped a little bit. And now, I try very much to do the stuff that I find most rewarding personally.
Awesome. And so just with regards to your television career, you were one of the main characters in The Real Hustle. Those of you listening, The Real Hustle was a BBC show. Is it right? BBC show that went on for a lot of seasons. I think it was was it 7 or 8 seasons? Is that right?
11
seasons. Oh my gosh. And it was an amazing show. I loved it because for me, it was one of those shows that highlighted how using psychology, you can manipulate people into doing things that they shouldn't do. For me, the key takeaway for this show was watch this show and it will show you how scammers scam you so that you don't get scammed. But it was a lot more entertaining than that because it kind of showed you how things happen, but it also did it in a really fun and cool way to get people, I don't know, it was kind of like watching a heist show, like lots of different scenes from a heist show all put together. How did you get into that show?
Well, I had done a film in the States which connected me with some producers who wanted to try a reality show in the US, and we designed a show called The Takedown. And The Takedown was the idea was that I'd spent a lot of time working against casinos, playing systems like card counting, but also we had hidden computers and all sorts of stuff going on. And that was the sort of idea for why don't we take that into a TV show?
Wow.
Ask casinos if they would let us come in, cheat, obviously give the money back, and then explain how we did it. And that was which was a very hard thing to do because most, if not 99% of casinos said no immediately. But we did get a couple of casinos on board, and that show was, relatively successful for court TV, and it did pretty well. But just after we finished making that, I was asked by a friend of mine, Anthony Owen, who's a producer in the UK, if I would come back over and help basically develop a show. And I don't really know if I was ever intended to be in the show. I don't know what the real score was because I kind of came over with the view that I was just here to help produce it because season 2 of The Takedown was being talked about at that point. And, the court TV were kind of pleased with it, and it just felt like that was going to be a big thing. So I came over here, went for a meeting, and at the meeting was Alex, who was already a friend. We already knew each other quite well.
Right.
And a guy called Drum and Money Coots, who is now a very well-known TV magician. He has a Netflix series.
Right.
He was very young then. And a producer whose name I've forgotten. And we basically were in a room in a not very salubrious place, but we were in this room and we were being filmed as we talked about how cons and scams worked, which is something that I've been working on, studying, researching, and also traveling all over the States, meeting people like real con artists, real cheaters, this has been, a deep fascination of mine. And so we were talking about this stuff and how it might be done on TV and went back and forward. That went to the BBC. BBC essentially said that, they quite like the big guy because he obviously knows what he's talking about. And Alex, he clearly is, got really genuine acting skills, but they felt, I think Drummond was too young and a little fresh faced to get away with a lot of this stuff. And I think they probably at that time might have been right. But, when they called me and said, they'd like you to do the pilot, I kind of played it like, oh yeah, of course. But I was genuinely surprised. I genuinely thought that it was going to be those two guys. And when we did the pilot, and the pilot's horrible, but it was recut into an episode 1 when we did the series. And, the BBC then, I can't remember who exactly it was at the BBC. It might have been Sam Anthony. They looked at it, they could see a show in it. They gave their notes. The notes were really good. And the production company went down that line. And, Alex and I from day one, very, very involved. And what we tried to do is we tried to do exactly what you said. How can we tell the public what these scams are, have them remember them, but also do it authentically? And that was a hugely important part from the very first episode, was that we found really clever ways to get people into situations for hidden camera television where they had no idea they were being filmed and no idea they were being conned. And that became the the main factor that made the show run for as long as it did.
Wow. I mean, it was an amazing show. Like whenever it was on, I'd always watch it. I loved it. I thought the energy between you, Alex, and Jess was just amazing. It was kind of like a conversion of Top Gear in a way, in that you had these really likable people that you can connect with show you some magic. I mean, it was magic that you were seeing, how you were manipulating people. It was amazing.
It's funny how the sensibilities that Alex and I brought as magicians, because we're both, also magicians.
Right.
Was important to sort of, have a sort of setup and punch on everything. And then it was also, we keep talking about, how lucky we were that we stumbled upon Jess, because, we did an audition for lots of people. And of course, the channel was asking for, a very pretty girl. And therefore we were, doing an audition with lots of people who met that. But Jess came in and had a certain natural talent for getting what she was tasked to get, but not by the most obvious way. So she had this natural Griff sense that, when we tried to recast years later, we figured out just how lucky we'd gotten on that first audition series, because, Jess just, you could literally say, this is what's happening. And she'd get it. I'll do it. No problem. No fear, innovation, and she'd go out and do it. And so I think somehow, not to blow our own trumpets, they got incredibly lucky with the 3-person combination, because Alex and I were already friends, but very, very different people. And Jess is completely different. And also, she's a different generation. And all of that fed into the fact that, we most of the time got on well together. I mean, we certainly had our ups and downs like you always do, but we got on together and we kind of liked working together. And I think that, we had a lot of fun at each other's expense, which is always the sign of, trust and actual respect for each other, and that all I think was in the show. But I would say, Sanj, that it was a disappointment to me that they didn't put more of that in the show.
Right.
And one of our producers, Martin Turner, kind of believed that as well. And so when we did, I think the last 2 series, maybe the last series, there was a real effort to try and get some of that energy that wasn't just presenting to the camera. That sort of behind the scenes fun that we had on the screen. So I think he put out a couple of episodes. One of them was when Real Hustle goes wrong, which of course it went wrong. It went wrong a lot, but
right.
Some of it was really funny when it went wrong.
Yeah.
Turned out to be a really popular episode.
A testament to the show was, you did 11 seasons. I've got friends in Hollywood who get to the end of their first season and it's over and it's heartbreaking. So just to get to 11 seasons, that's amazing. Why did the show stop in the end?
I think it stopped because it needed to. I think that we had done enough without really changing it and going in a different direction. And we had pitched a lot of ideas, including a kind of Top Gear of cons and scams, which, is still something that Alex and I talk about and still something that we could do. It's not really Top Gear like having fun with conning people. It's not really like that. What it is trying to keep the topic entertaining. I actually like Watchdog. Alex and I were on an episode of Watchdog, or 2 actually, maybe even 3. And we didn't particularly care for it. It's so staged. It's so, safe. Remember we were on Watchdog and somebody said, you can't say Facebook. And we said, oh, is it because it's a brand? No, it's technical jargon. My grandmother won't know what that means. And we just stared at each other. And, this is a TV producer who's just going by some, BBC's not unique in this, but going by some sort of, rule book of some sort. And whereas with Real Hustle, we felt like we were more free to just talk about whatever. And we felt that, we could maybe take the format in a different direction, inform people in different ways, use the Real Hustle format of doing the scams, use other things. There was never any appetite for that. And so we felt that it had kind of done its thing. And it was, we always felt maybe in a few years, but I particularly felt that I dedicated a lot of time to this. Alex and I were on production from minute one on every single series. You know, the first day we were in there before the producers sometimes.
Wow.
It was very unusual, but we were writing the show, but we were also, you know, we'd say, this is what the scam is. We'd also have to try and figure out, how can we do this with hidden cameras in one day? And how, and, you know, how do we protect the mark? Because obviously you don't want the mark to get too upset, and you don't want the mark to certainly, you know, be put in any kind of actual jeopardy. But we would work all of that out with the producers. We'd be there every day. Other presenters of other shows would turn up, you know, on the day of filming and maybe a rehearsal day, you know, read their cards and then go out and do whatever they're doing. Alex and I would be there from day one. Jess would kind of come in for rehearsals and stuff, but she would not be in as much as us because she wasn't writing the stuff. And that still amazes me, you know, that, you know, she would come in and we'd been talking for weeks and we'd have all these unbelievably ridiculous ideas on the wall. And we'd say, okay, so I kind of want you to go in and then, you know, tell this person that and then take this from them and then walk away before they notice. And she'd go, right, okay. No problem. And, you know, it was, again, can't say it enough. You know, you don't find that very often. And all of that meant that we had spent years, because every series we would end a series and we get picked up within a month or two, or even before the end of a series.
Right. Okay.
What that meant is we couldn't do anything else.
It was very consuming at the time.
Really, really time consuming. And I think that one season a year, preferably for double money, would have been, you know, one season a year rather than two would have been, I think, better for us to do other things.
Yeah.
But, you know, recently, Alex and I, just before the whole COVID thing kicked off, you know, January of 2020, we were talking to the production company and, you know, we have ideas that we don't necessarily have to go back to them because they aren't suitably different, but, you know, why break up a good relationship? We might do another series.
There's definitely a strong legacy there. It's so interesting that you talk about how much work went into it, because I'm sure there was a lot of work that went into it. It was so slick, the show. For me, it was so slick. Like whenever the reveal occurred, I was always like, just amazed. Were the people that you were scamming, were they literally people who just didn't know what was happening?
Yeah, 100%. And
that's amazing.
It was not easy to do that, but it saved the show because, you know, there was an American version and the people who were involved with the American version were involved with ours sometime after that. And they wanted to fake everything. And we're trying, you know, they were genuinely trying to fake stuff behind our backs because we were insisting against it. The problem is, if Alex, Jess, or I sat down and somebody was going along with it, we would know. Instantly, we would know. And so we would cut it every single time. And this became, you know, for a few weeks, this became a real problem, but we kind of went back to the way we'd been doing it, and that was fine. It's a lot more difficult. I did a show in the US called Scammed, which was a 2-hour special for the History Channel.
Right.
Just in between the last 2 seasons of Real Hustle. And I went over there, and Scammed was different in that I was creating scams based on old cons, whereas in the BBC show, it had to be a con that was happening now that we were reporting in some way, right? That was their kind of angle. Well, when I did the show in America, again, they all came in and they were trying to not just set up people, you know, so they just kind of go with it, which of course doesn't work. Their interviews, I would see them saying, they would just tell them what to say in the interview. I want you to say this. And so as a producer on that show and a director on that show, I'd say, no, you can't do that. You have to ask them what they think and just be a bit more patient. You can guide them, but you can't say, just say this. But that's what they're used to doing over there. A lot of shows are just, you know, faked. And for us, the thing that we had that made the Real Hustle authentic and entertaining was that candid camera moment of realization that people just cannot act. I don't care if they're Robert De Niro. You cannot act that moment when you realize you've just been had. And like I said, it saved the show because the press went after the BBC and they said the Real Hustle was lying to the public and that these people were all actors. And they wrote a story that when you read the story and if you knew the truth, you could see how they were negotiating their way around the truth to create the impression that we had been, and we were able to prove to the BBC Trust that was all complete garbage. But we were able to do that because going all the way back to that issue that we had, and Alex and I essentially saying there's no point doing it and we won't do it unless you do it with real people. It made everybody's life a lot more difficult. It was a very hard show to produce, but it was the one thing that made the show good, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on authenticity. It's that authenticity that gives it that creative flair. Similar to, I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but the new Borat film that did really well at the Golden Globes. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing an interview with Sacha Baron Cohen talking about how difficult those sketches were to deliver, and talking about how much blood, sweat and tears goes into the planning process on these gags. And one of the reasons why it did so well is because you can feel the reality on the camera film from the people that are reacting to it. And as you say, you can't fake that.
Absolutely. And you know, I think that what Sacha Baron Cohen has done with that and with his other characters is really, I mean, there's got to be a ton of material on the cutting room floor that was completely unusable. But it is that thing of preparation and really hard work. But more importantly, the ability to dance with the unwary or unknowing co-actor that you have. You know, this person doesn't know they're on film, it doesn't know they're on the camera. They could do anything. And if you're just going to stop and blink when it goes off script, it's no good. And that was the thing we found very difficult to find, was anybody who could really, really jive in the middle of a scam. And I think that obviously, you know, Sacha Baron Cohen has that in spades because, you know, he's a very, very talented guy, clearly, but the willingness to put yourself into those situations and then remain creative and funny. I mean, I didn't have to be funny. I mean, I was funny when I didn't want to be, but I didn't have to be funny in a real hustle. So, you know, all of these skills are really important to that type of thing. But, you know, the thing that is most important, and the thing that I think we prioritized right at the very beginning, I can tell you the thing that happened is we did a version of the 3-card Monty on the beach. I think it was in Brighton. And Alex was throwing these sort of like leather coasters. And I was coming in, and the scam was that I secretly moved a couple of the coasters when Alex wasn't looking. And the Mark, who was going to be the victim, who didn't know anything about it, realized that Alex didn't know where the marked coaster was, and therefore he could beat him and put all his money on the table, and then lost it all because the two that I'd switched actually were irrelevant. The marked one was the other one.
Right.
And that was a scam. And we did that. And then the next thing that happened is that Alex kicked over the box and walked away, and we all walked away. And this poor guy's standing on his own, not knowing what just happened, and all of his cash is gone. And so that illustrates what happens with the 3-card Monty, which is a fantastic illustration of how con games work in itself. And I use it all the time. But when we first saw the first cut, the producer at that time, this is right at the very beginning, this is the pilot and getting into the first episode and all that. The first cut we saw, there was a big, you know, like a rubber stamp, poof, on the screen, sucker. And Alex and I both, we didn't have to talk about it. We both of us said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And the reason you can't do that is that you feel like a sucker. Of course you do. And con artists think you're a sucker. Of course they do. That's why they're con artists. They're despicable. We, on the other hand, understand that anybody can be conned, and being conned does not necessarily mean that you've been foolish. I mean, maybe you've been foolish, but it certainly doesn't mean that you're a fool. We wanted to basically say to people, you can be conned. This is how it happens, and this is how you protect yourself. And if we call these people on our show suckers, we may be able to do a series, but once that series goes out, anybody who sees that is never going to sign a release.
Yeah.
And so protecting the people that we did this to was a huge priority from the very beginning. And that meant we did 11 seasons. And in those 11 seasons, I think 5 people across all 11 seasons refused to sign a release afterwards, which is completely fine. You know, another rule we had is if they didn't want to do it, we wouldn't badger them too much. We would just, you know, we'd ask them nicely.
Right.
And we'd follow up if they felt, you know, the next day. But if they really didn't want to sign it, it's not their fault. You know, they didn't intend that to happen. But 5 people in 11 seasons is a direct result of us prioritizing the well-being of what we call marks, which is it's a con term for people who get conned. But we would prioritize the safety and the well-being of the mark from the beginning, and that really helped us.
Well, I think in any industry, particularly the arts industry, whether it's film, music, photography, etc., you talked about looking for trust and just being nice to people. You will have a much longer career if you stick by that rule.
It's a small business. All of it is a small business, and your reputation will eventually get about. And that can be deserved, and that can be, I think everybody's entitled to have a meltdown in a high pressure environment, but there are people who have meltdowns every day, and it's never their fault. It's always somebody else's. And I think that we see that all the time. And the last thing you want to do is to bring any of that energy to some person who's just gone for lunch with their friend and got conned and then found out they were on TV.
Yeah.
It's now entirely up to you. Just, do you want to do it or not? And they did, because we treated them with respect.
You did 11 seasons of The Real Hustle. Mm-hmm. You've been a filmmaker for 20 years, but now you're doing more films. I've watched quite a few of them over the last week. You touched on how you got into film, but after The Real Hustle, what was your drive to focus on filmmaking outside of The Real Hustle?
Well, before Real Hustle, the first film I was involved with was a film called Shade, and my friend had written that, and we would sit in we're members of a club in LA called the Magic Castle, and we would sit in the corner and talk about his film, which was all about cheaters and con artists, and he would pick my brains, and I would, learn more about the film business from him, because he's also, and this guy's no slouch when it comes to, sleight of hand and stuff either. He's an amazing sleight of hand artist. But we would talk back and forward, and then one day he called me and said, I've got the film off the ground. Would you come over and help? And I did. And it wasn't until I got over and helped that he kind of laid it on me that he'd actually gotten real funding and, in terms of millions of dollars and real actors. And, it was a lot bigger than I had expected.
Wow. Due
to his hustle, he managed to get, an actor on board, and that started the ball rolling. And that was a great experience for me, because I wasn't just a consultant. I ended up having a role in the film. So I had an acting role. And then, a couple of weeks into production, the line producer asked somebody, so why is he always here? He doesn't need to be here every single day. I would be in there first thing in the morning, and I'd be there till last thing at night. And it wasn't just because the food was free. And he figured out that I was going around all of the departments on set, and I'd do card tricks for people on the downtime and chat to them and get to know them. And so he'd ask around, and I don't know what he thought I was up to. He might have thought, I don't know what he might have thought, but he was suspicious. And by the time he'd spoken to a couple of departments, he figured out that I was getting a free film school and learning as much as I could. And within a couple of weeks of starting, the guy's name was Carl Mazzico, and Carl and I were quite close and getting to know each other. And I remember I was sitting having a coffee, waiting for something to happen, and the director and the director of photography came in and asked if I wanted to be the second unit director.
Wow.
And it was, I think, directly down to Damien, the director, and Carl said, yeah, okay, so if he wants a film school, let's give him one. And now suddenly I'm able to direct a couple of scenes. The director was in a scene, so I directed that one. I did all of the retakes and the reshoots, because some of the scenes had to be redone while we were still filming.
Right.
And the opening title. And so all of that meant that I came away with a real appreciation of how big the job was, and whether or not I felt I could do it. And I really felt I could do it, because, when they asked me if I wanted to do the opening titles, I had storyboards the next day, and they're exactly what's in the opening titles. And the opening titles is all my hands and my friend Jason England the director's hands are in there once, and a friend of ours, Earl Nelson, who's sort of a legendary magician, his hands are in there a couple of times.
Right.
But mostly it's me and Jason England doing extremely difficult gambling sleight of hand used to cheat people, but exposed. So I had the camera at really weird angles. I had a glass table looking up to see the bottom deal. So we did all of that. So I came away thinking, I can do this. And that's what I want to do. And strangely, I do remember the gaffer on the show, who was an English guy, because the DOP was English. And so his whole crew, all his lighting guys and his camera guys were all English. He said, yeah, you'll be the governor one day, but it's going to take a while. Always does. And I don't know if that's one of those self-fulfilling prophecies once it gets into your head, but in between all of that, the Takedown happened, the Real Hustle happened. And so when Real Hustle ended, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I know I didn't want to be back in front of the camera because I don't really like it.
Right.
And I was on a flight and I was listening to some music, and the music sort of got in my head a little bit, and I started playing this one piece back and forward, and I decided I want to make a short film. I'm going to use this bit of music. And I wrote the short film on the flight. I landed, was in LA for a bit. I came home. I called all the people I needed, flew in a DP from Norway, and we made our first little short film. And that was the first time that I realized that I could take some control over this, and maybe not have the greatest budgets in the world, or even any budget sometimes, but I could get stories on film.
What was the film?
It was called The Magic Box. It's still up there. You look on YouTube. It's a short film. No dialogue. It's a great piece of music by Pasho Bell, Canon D.
Right.
And it's quite funny, actually, because it's on YouTube. I get quite a lot of takedown notices by people claiming that it's their music.
Yeah.
I have to say, first of all, I bought the rights for this purpose, which I did. The performance is from 40 years ago, and the song was written in the 17th century or something, so probably not theirs. Yeah. But anyway, that was the first thing that we did, and that kind of focused me on, this is what I want to do.
Amazing.
But as I've learned, it's one of those things there's always years between things. It's not something you can just do one after the other, unless somebody's throwing money at you, which they aren't yet.
Yeah. Well, the work that you're making is really good. Very dramatic, very atmospheric, very beautiful as well, very well shot. Let's talk about some of those films. So tell us about Our Magic.
Well, Our Magic kind of came off the back of The Magic Box. The Magic Box, the magic community liked it because it's just a story about a trick being passed down through a family as a experience. Little boy watches his grandfather do a magic trick and loves it, and then he gets too old for it, and then his grandfather's gone, and now it's a reminder, and then he shows it to his little girl, and it's a lovely little thing that I think people really liked. And I did that because I had a camera, a Canon 5D, if you're a camera person.
Yep.
That I had bought specifically to do all of this. So when I got to LA, I bought that camera. I wrote that thing on the flight. I bought that camera and I went back and I used it, and that was the first thing. And so once I had done that, I thought, well, what else would I like to do? And I know there was a bunch of books coming out about magic. I won't name them because they were generally pretty terrible.
Right.
There was one written by somebody who went to magic conventions and talked to magicians without telling them he was writing a book, and then claimed that he'd been, claimed to his publisher that he had some knowledge that he didn't have. And the book did very well. I read it and I thought it was absolutely atrocious. It didn't understand magic at all. Then another one came out, and I'm looking at these books thinking, the problem is none of these people are actually magicians or in the magic community for long enough to understand magicians or the art.
Right.
Wouldn't it be nice for somebody to do that? And then I thought, why don't we do that? And we did some little short interview pieces at a couple of conventions, my friend and I, Jason England. We recorded them. I edited them. I started to get a sense for how I would like to edit. And as we did that, our friends Dan and Dave, who had a company that sold magic and magic props and made bespoke things, Dan and Dave I would stay with them in LA because I had a beautiful apartment right in the middle of Hollywood, and I would use their spare room. And one day we were just chatting, and I said, why don't we do this? And we talked about it, and we decided to kickstart it. We did a Kickstarter campaign, made its target, then it made a stretch goal, and suddenly we had the money. And the goal was to make a film about magic by magicians that gave the answers that nobody else knew to ask those questions. It was like, how do I stop all these magicians from giving that answer that they've got kind of prepared for the lay audience, and how do we give them an intimate look? And would that even be interesting to non-magicians? And I think to a limited degree, yes, it is. I think if you're genuinely interested in magic, then our magic is going to answer a lot of questions for you. But I came at it thinking, what does a normal magic documentary look like? It looks like what you would expect. Here's a person who's a magician who you might have seen on TV, and here's footage of them doing magic, and they may talk about someone, and here's footage of them doing magic. So I kind of approached it from the point of view of trying to show what it would be like to speak to 31 of the most experienced and creative people in the art form, from my perspective, and have them talk to you honestly and frankly, but not necessarily have to sell the art of magic to you along the way by doing lots of clips.
Yep.
So I decided that to the best of my ability, I wanted no actual magic performances in the whole thing, which is a challenging thing to do, but I think it worked. There's a little bit of magic in there, but generally speaking, it's about people talking about what they do and why they do it and what's special about it and why it's important.
I got that from the film completely. Like there's an allure about the magic community that is exciting. Like it's a little bit like an underworld. And I really got that from the documentary. It didn't feel cheesy. It felt like you were talking to some unique people, but you were talking to them in a way that allowed them to connect with people listening. I don't know. It was really refreshing. It was kind of like they were warriors or fighters or something, going into battle, and they'd learned this skill that was their identity.
What makes all those people interesting is that they all have unique experiences that have led them to a perspective of this thing, which is in the hands of many of them an art form. And they've done that in a world that has quite often sidelined magic as some kind of, as you say, cheesy, right? We talk about it in the film. And magicians have done that to themselves to some degree. And they continue, and I say magicians in the loosest terms, but, you still continue to get people giving away, really disappointing secrets. And, because, the secret... we say it in the film, magicians are guarding an empty safe. The secrets are not that interesting. What's really interesting is what we can do with them to create illusions of this, that, or the other. And we're not protecting, and again, this is in the film, but we're not protecting the secrets from the audience. We're protecting the audience from the secrets. So when people go on to Facebook and give away, a really useful tool used by performers all over the world to create all sorts of different, effects, that when you're sitting in the audience, you're blown away. Now, I don't doubt that a smart person or a motivated person could go away and come up with some kind of solution to that. And I don't doubt that a lot of people would like to get online and find out how it's done. But the truth is that that's a disappointing. You will be disappointed by how it's done. It's never as interesting as you think. So when I see that, I always talk about, it's not about secrecy. It's about respect for the people who also use these things, and for the people that will get a thrill out of seeing it and experiencing it, and maybe really thinking they want to know, but in actual fact, they don't. You take all of that away by kind of giving it away for your own good. And magicians have kind of done that since, going back to, people who presented magic as real, and maybe in the Dark Ages, there was a reason they kept these things secret, that powder that they had in their pocket would make the flyer explode.
Yeah. You
don't want to tell them about that powder, because then it's just powder in your pocket. And a really good magician can get rid of all of that garbage, psychic powers, real magic, all of that, and still make you experience the impossible through their own approach. And so that's why those people in our magic are all so different, And some of those people are fascinating people outside of the world of magic, but all of them are completely different individuals. And I think that's what makes magic so really interesting for me and amazing for me, is you've got all of these perspectives. And sometimes, here's one thing about magic. Most people who do magic are only kind of okay at it at best, because there's so many of us. And some people are really great at like 3 or 4 things that maybe 90% of other magicians already do, but they're really good at them too. And they go out and make a living with those. And then there's another percentage that create their own ideas and are terrible, and there are those who create their own ideas and are fantastic. But there's this little group at the top, like everything, like comedy, like acting, like drawing, like painting. There's a little group at the top who take what they do to a level that is far superior. The only problem for us as magicians is you listen to a really great musician, because you've got an ear. And when you hear a bad musician or a mediocre one, you also know because you've got that ear. Magic is such a powerful, powerful thing that the trick can be so good that you believe that you kind of fall for the magician. Yeah. To some extent. You don't have or at least most people don't have a taste for what's good and what's bad, or what they prefer in magic. And that's a direct result of, the problem of secrecy and, this idea that you're keeping something from us and all these things. It's a very complex topic, but I could answer it in an hour and a half right now, or you could just watch the movie.
So those of you listening, please do watch the movie. It is really cool. I think you also touched, Paul, on just the power of art in its purest form, in the sense that as we as humans are edging into this digital landscape that is already overpowering us, but is going to overcome everything that we do, the experience of having a one-to-one with someone through an art form like magic is something that you cannot replace with a digital thing. And you touched on how when people want to know something, they'll go straight onto Google or whatever and find out how that happens. But if they were to kind of emulate that idea or that art or whatever it is, it wouldn't connect with the person in the same way that it connected with them when they saw it in the flesh.
Yeah. Yeah. And, some people know to value that. And that's a personal taste and experience thing. But some people, will protect the memory of something or the initial experience. Years ago, I was at a convention for magicians in Italy. And at night, I did some magic for a bunch of the people, all other magicians, by the way, but I did some magic for them, and I fooled them all very badly with something. And the next day I was giving a lecture, and in that lecture I had been asked if I'd explain it. And so I said, okay, I'll explain that. As I said, they're all magicians. They're there, they've paid to come and learn. And as I started, I performed the same trick again. And then a guy got up, he was in the front row, and he left. And the way that he left was a bit odd, and I thought, I wonder what's going on there. I saw the guy a little bit later and I said, did I say something that maybe, did I offend you? Or he said, no, I saw you do that trick the night before and I didn't want to know how it was done.
Wow. Okay.
Because it really blew me away. And I learned a lot from him saying that, because he said, listen, I don't do that type of magic. I don't want to know. And I've learned how illusions work. I'm never going to get in an illusion. But I've learned how they work because I design them for other shows. I design them for TV shows. I take an interest in them. And I've also learned how, mentalism is something that I use a lot in my work in various forms. But I always think one form can inform the other. So you can, by expanding your mind into areas that you might not want to get up. I don't want to get up and do Darren Brown's act, right? But the strategies and the techniques and the methods that Darren uses inform the type of thing that I would use in a intimate performance with a group of people.
Right.
And by learning that, I've, improved. I've widened the palette that I can brush from.
Got you.
And what he said was, he said, no, I agree with that, because we had that conversation. He said, I agree with that, but it wouldn't have been worth losing the memory in this case. And I really took that as the highest compliment, of course.
That is. Yeah, hell yeah. Like, that's amazing.
But we want to get people, like real people, what we call non-magicians, real people. We want to get them to have the same feeling.
Mm.
And so that they're like, I have no idea how that's done. That's completely impossible. And I just don't want to know. I love it when people feel that way. But I also understand it when people are irritated to the point of distraction by, their brain doesn't work. I've heard John Cleese, I've never met John Cleese, but I've heard John Cleese has this fascination with understanding everything. Mm. So therefore, a magic trick, he will not leave you alone afterwards. He's got to know because he sees everything logically. And I meet people like that in shows. Most of the time, I just bring them to my side of the table and let them enjoy it from the back, because why not? I'm not really learning anything. I'm certainly not going to let them record it, but it's bringing them in and helping them to understand. And at the same time, they get an appreciation for the show from their side of the table. So it's a very, very big, very textured topic.
Yeah. So let's talk about your film work. Mm. We spoke about Our Magic. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about these dramatizations that you've created. First one, Isolani. Is that how you say it?
Isolani, yeah. Or if you're Italian, Isolani. But Isolani, yeah.
Tell us about it.
Isolani is a very low-budget feature. They all are. And it was based on a story that I'd written some years ago that was inspired by someone who I knew when I was a kid who had been alienated from their parents in there was a child involved, and they ended up essentially living in a not a very good part of town, and we would see her occasionally, in the local shopping center, and we went to school with her, and I remember talking to her, and we weren't ever going to be anything other than just friends chatting. There was none of that energy there. It was purely learning about the situation that she was in and how her parents had essentially abandoned her for the sake of not wanting to look bad to their neighbors. I mean, there was a lot of that going on.
Right.
And her predicament had just stuck with me, and I don't really know what happened to her. I don't, we didn't keep in touch or anything like that. But it played on my mind a little bit, and I started to wonder, one of the things about her was that she was very, very, very smart, and it kind of interrupted. Like I said, I don't know what happened after that, but certainly interrupted her education. She was very young, and I just thought, what if a person in that situation was involved in something much more dangerous and was the obvious victim of several sides of a dangerous situation, but because A, they were motivated by the fact that they had a child, and B, they were smarter and more resourceful than they seemed, what would happen if they could outplay everybody? And that was kind of the goal in my head, was to try and put a character in that situation, and then see what would happen. And then, as you write it, you don't really know exactly what's going to happen. There's real moments when you're writing where a character just does something and you go, oh, where's she going with this?
Wow.
And, so the story kind of adjusted and changed as it was being written. A lot of the stuff I'd gone into it with fell away, and what really was left was this, this idea of somebody who was like the person I don't want to say her name, but like the person I'm talking about, was very reserved and very quiet and almost, almost strangely so, a very, very quiet person, but incredibly intense in her head. That fact that she could be underestimated. There's an opening line of Isolani is a quote that says that women don't make great chess players because they're not great fighters. And I've had a few people ask me about that and say, you can't say that. And so, well, you're right. That's what the whole movie's about. Is about that being wrong.
Yeah.
It's proven absolutely wrong by the end of the movie. Maybe it gets people off on the wrong foot, but the movie is about pointing out that, for me, the most dangerous place is between a mother and child. And there's an aspect to that in this. But I really wanted to create a situation where you had all of these people jockeying for whatever they wanted, whether it was for money or power or for position, and this person that they're all trying to control actually drops them all in it and gets out of it and essentially wins through at the end. So that was kind of the goal going in, and the rest of it kind of happened from writing to see what happened to her. And so really, I wouldn't say what I just said is any kind of elevator pitch. It's really talking about where the movie came from. But what the movie's about is about a very young, tragically young mother who witnesses a murder and then has to outplay a killer, a corrupt policeman, and an ambitious prosecutor in order to win through at the end. So that's what Isolani is, and certainly nothing to do with magic, which a lot of my magician friends, I think, have rented it and been quite, I don't know what they were expecting, but there's no magic.
For me, it was a very dark and gritty departure to what I know of you before I started to research you for this podcast. And hence one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because with regards to your filmmaking, where is the journey taking you now? Because you've had a really colorful life, specifically within the magic space. Where is filmmaking taking you now?
I don't really know is the answer to that. I think it's such a strange business, the filmmaking business, that it doesn't matter what you do. There are people, and everybody knows them because, if you're a filmmaker, and there are many of us, you'll hear from all your friends who are not in the film industry about the people that, won the lottery of filmmaking. They had a movie for $7,000 and it got picked up at Cannes, and suddenly they're making millions of dollars and things. That's not the goal. The goal is to tell stories and through film. And so I don't really know is the answer to that. I would like to have better budgets to tell bigger stories and B, to support the crews and the collaborators that I have. Very fortunate to have extremely talented and motivated and engaged and enthusiastic people who will work with me sometimes for absolutely nothing. And obviously I want them all to be paid and for us all to move up. But really where it's taking me is all the stories I want to tell are quite different to each other.
Yeah.
Isolani is very different to Con Men. Con Men's very different to, we have another movie we've been trying to get off the ground, which is a sort of vampire action movie, but very different to what you've seen before. Well, certainly it's in the genre. Another movie is a ghost story, and another movie is a sort of Black Mirror type affair where, it's really about how people interact with what's happening on live television.
Amazing.
All of these things are very different, and these are all quite dark, but, somewhere in me, there's an idea for a film shot on a cruise ship that's a comedy, because I just saw the potential for that. But it's offbeat and it's different, and therefore the only chance of getting these things made is by finding somebody who has a little bit of vision and the ability to raise the money. And that's the part of filmmaking that is unfortunately necessary, but it's very, very hard if what you really want to do is be a storyteller, but what you also have to do is be some sort of financier.
Yeah.
It's not an easy road. I don't know where it's taking me. I really appreciate the ability to do anything low budget where I essentially make what I want to make. The more money comes in, then, there's other opinions and other things, and it becomes a slightly different job then. But I'm really just hoping to be able to tell more stories and tell different stories to what people would expect. You know, I could easily go out and make a movie like everybody else is making, you know, when there's lots of just fulfilling the requirements of content that we hear from all the streamers and all the networks, where they say we want, you know, more romantic comedies set at Christmas because they make money. Oh, great. But, you know, I do have a story set at Christmas. I don't think it's a romantic comedy, though. So I don't know.
One thing I did get from the films that I saw on your Vimeo page is that you do have a very unique style. It was really cool. And I do wish you the best of success with these films, because I think at some point, as you grow these stories, I believe someone will come knocking on your door and say, hey, let's make this big budget movie.
I hope so. I mean, I haven't... it takes a long time sometimes, but, we've made money on everything technically. But it is that thing of, some things catch later than others. You know, con men never did any business at all for years.
Right.
And then suddenly it went, I guess it just, the algorithm just popped it up on Amazon, and suddenly, we realized a lot of people were watching it, and then all the reviews started coming in from some people hated it. It's okay. Some people absolutely loved it. Some people thought it was fine. But you get, you suddenly realize that people are getting there's an audience who suddenly get what you were getting at, that the story, I think you've seen con men, it doesn't end until the very last frame. You don't really know what it is until the very last frame. That was hard to do when people were telling you, yes, but in The Sting, they did this. Yeah, but this isn't The Sting. Yeah. This isn't Hustle. This is something a little different. And doing different is sometimes quite hard because the audience kind of feels entitled to familiarity, which is a very odd thing. But, that I know different because you and I met when I showcased Pepper's Ghost's holographic technology to you. Mm. And before I worked on the 2-pack hologram, people just couldn't understand what it was that we're doing. They thought it was cool. They loved it, but they just didn't understand where it fitted. And then when you do connect and it comes stratospheric, then everyone understands. But it's that journey up that very steep hill that's the hardest. Yeah. And it sounds like you've been witness to that many times, including on The Real Hustle at the pilot episode. Yeah. The one thing I've learned is that the so-called creative industries have very little imagination. And, this idea of having some vision, very rare. And it may even be accidental. But, when you've got something that you kind of have a lot of faith in, it can be very difficult trying to explain it to somebody when you sort of assume it should be self-evident that this is going to be great. But until they see it, until they experience it, they don't really get it. And that's kind of a common thing across all, and especially true of magic. I mean, I work on TV magic shows and trying to tell people what the effect is going to be. And, this... Adams says it in Our Magic, he has a great trick and he shows it to the director and the director loves it. And then he has to explain to him how it's done because he's going to shoot it. And as soon as he sees it's just somebody pulling a bit of string somewhere, he hates it and doesn't want to do it because it's disappointing. And that's a staggering lack of vision. But I've experienced that in situations with people that you would assume to be in that job. You would have a little bit more imagination. So sometimes you just have to get it out there, let people see it and let them start to attach what they've seen to what they can do or what they might do or what they think would be possible in the future. Yeah. And sometimes you just can't tell them. Paul, we're starting to get a little bit low on time. I kind of feel like you and I could talk forever. It's just fascinating, everything that you're saying. I've just got a few questions that I just wanted to kind of throw in there before we get to the end, if that's okay. Yep. Where are you from? I was born in Cyprus. And I was raised in Singapore until I was about 8 or 9 years old. Right. And then I was, my parents were Scottish. And then I was basically in Scotland until, from then on, essentially. But because I had a very strong English accent, I think, when I was in Singapore, RAF schools were all English kids.
Right.
And I obviously picked up Scottish accent when I came over, but it took a while. It has meant that my accent is very malleable. Wherever I go, I'll pick up little bits and pieces, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But generally speaking, when I travel to the States, my Scottish part tends to drop away almost completely. And that's not deliberate. It just does.
Right.
So
interesting. With regards to you as a person, what advice would you give yourself if you knew now what you didn't know then?
I mean, that's a great question. You know, the thing I'd probably tell myself is to stop caring about what other people are going to think and to stop waiting for permission to do things. I do think that's a very common flaw in creative people, that you do something, you wonder, maybe you imagine how people will love it, or maybe you worry how people will think or worse, you'll think, people will think that you shouldn't be doing this. And I've had that genuinely consciously said to me about, overstepping the boundaries of what I'm supposed to be doing. And the me that heard that then and the me now are very different people.
Right.
And I think that my feeling of GFY that I got after that has helped me a lot in my work, my attempts to work. But the me now would have told them to GFY pretty much in the moment. So that would be the thing of, like, I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. If you've got something in you and you want to do it, shame on anybody who tells you can't do it. I mean, unless it's going to hurt you. But, genuinely, I think that's the big advice, is that a little bit too much respect for other people's opinions can be a very unhealthy thing.
Amazing. I mean, I do like the F word now more than ever. Mm-hmm. It's very useful. Obviously done in the most respectful way to people you're talking to. I'm sure there's loads of people on the same page. Until you realize that, it doesn't seem like common sense. Yeah. I was once told by a very close friend at the time, and a very creative person who I really respect, told me, he said, we liked you better when you were just doing card tricks. Whoa. And that was the end of our friendship. Although we're still friendly, that was the end of us being really close friends. Right. And, I speak to people who have similar stories, and it comes from different places. The fact it came from that place is actually quite staggering, considering, who that person is and what that person has done, and how, artistic they are, and how awful it would be for anybody to say that to them. But, whatever caused that person to say that, it had a very deep impact on me, because that's vocalizing the subconscious fear of what everybody might be thinking. Yeah. And then it's said to you, and then you just think, you know what? No. It was probably the best thing that could happen, even though it wasn't said for those reasons. It was probably the best thing that could happen. And I think that, there's a real, all of us who do anything, whoever you are, wherever you come from, all of us who do anything, if it's sincere and it's genuine and it's not from some negative space, it's usually because you've overcome doubts that essentially come from yourself. Yeah. And those are fueled by excuses that come from the outside. One of them being the fear of what other people might think. Well, on that note, Paul, that was amazing. First of all, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're a busy guy, but I really, really value this. And I'm sure everyone listening is going to get a lot of value from what you've said. So thank you. I hope so. Nice to talk to you. Those of you listening, again, thanks so much for sticking with us on this fantastic journey of Sanj Surati Talks. Again, if you want to share, please use the hashtag Sanj Surati Talks, all one word. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please be good.